Welcome to Season 5 of the Charity Matters podcast. I'm Heidi Johnson, nonprofit founder, lifelong helper, and your host. I've been interviewing the helpers for over a decade with my blog, and I'm so excited to be sharing these inspiring conversations on our podcast. Join me as we learn the challenges and stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and modern-day heroes who set out to solve the problems of humanity. Did you know that over 9 million children in the United States live in food insecure homes? Today's guest is no stranger to this fact. Join us today as Dan Zauderer, the founder of Grassroots Groceries, shares his incredible journey of going from middle school teacher to a nonprofit founder, taking on this challenge to feed America's children. It's a story you're not going to want to miss. We are so excited today to have Dan Zauderer from Grassroots Groceries to share his incredible story of the amazing work he's doing in New York to feed so many. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Heidi, for having me. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about Grassroots Grocery.
We're really excited to learn about it. And I think these conversations are so important to have because I really, truly believe that the world is not focusing on the right people. And there are heroes among us and angels among us who walk the streets next to us every day, and we don't know their stories. And I think in a time where the media keeps telling us things are so bad, when we really look at people and tell stories like yours, I think it's inspiring for all of us of what we can do.
I've just been blown away by the goodness of humanity, ever since I started a nonprofit, and it's definitely something that we need to focus on more. Is just, it's easier to focus on sound bites and make people angry. But the truth of the matter is that there's so many people who are looking to do good and so many people who do good and that are focused on doing good. And if we turn the spotlight onto them, then I think that people will be happier and well-being will be better across 100%. Lots of the United States and beyond.
Exactly. And that's why we're having these conversations. And I've been doing this for 10 years. So the podcast is, 10 years I've been interviewing nonprofit founders. But tell us a little bit about what Grassroots Groceries does.
Sure. So we actually just changed our mission statement. Our mission statement is to advance food justice by cultivating a community of neighbors helping neighbors. And so what that means in action is it means neighbors coming together in bottom-up grassroots service to make sure that their fellow neighbors have enough food to eat. And there are two different programs that we do that through. I can get into specifics, but it's really just founded upon the notion that we all need to come together to take a bite out of food insecurity. This is not something that just, big food pantries can do alone. It's not something that we can just leave up to the policymakers. It's something that, to be effective, it's a problem that's so big that the only way to really shift it is for everybody to be involved in that, whether it's by people roping in their corporate workplace, or whether it's by people reaching out to their local Girl Scout troops and schools and churches and temples and mosques, or whether it's about, people just taking a couple hours out of their week or month to help make sure that their neighbors are nourished and fed. That's what this is about. It's kind of a narrative shift focusing on bottom-up direct action from the people.
Which I love, because I think that at the end of the day, nonprofits, we exist because policymakers can't do everything. Nonprofits exist because we're people who care. And C, we exist because we create community and culture and connection. And at our roots of what we are as humans is we were a tribe. We were tribes that took care of each other. And to your exact point, we have to get back to that simple yet basic human nature of just taking care of your neighbor, right? I mean, that's everything.
I also think that however the media wants to paint the picture of the world these days, is we kind of just spoke about that there are people, I really feel almost all of them, they're born good and they want to do good. And so part of my work at Grassroots Grocery is just creating a catalyst for that, good-hearted nature in people to come out. Because I've just met so many families that have come up to me and that have shared that they've just been so eager to get involved in service, but both themselves as adults, but also for their young people. We work with lots of children, under the age of 13, for example, and they just can't find options, and it's not easy, and people have busy lives and they're inundated and bombarded with the stresses
and they don't know where to start.
World. Right. So if we can make that easy and we can provide a catalyst, that's it's just basically about operationalizing this notion of neighbors helping neighbors and applying it specifically to the realm of food justice. It's kind of what we're all about. So.
Which is brilliant. So I have to go kind of the beginning. Did you grow up with a really philanthropic family? Did you grow up with great role models? Were you always kind of leaning this way? I mean, I know your backstory, but obviously people listening do not. And we're going to get to that, but I'd like to know, were there early seeds of philanthropy or...
there's a couple of ways to answer that question. I think if you want to get to the root, or as early as possible, it starts with me. I was actually adopted at birth, and I was adopted in Waco, Texas at birth.
My dog is from Waco, Texas, just so you know. We adopted our dog from Waco.
Wow. Well, then your dog and I have something in common. And so I have something in common with two people in the household. Anyway. So I think that fact alone, I think, made me aware of the wider world in a way that sometimes people aren't, because we grow up in our silos in our communities. But I think just knowing that I was adopted into just such a generous, well-to-do, loving family, it made me grateful for what I had. Right. It also made me aware of the fact that it wasn't automatically going to be that way, that I won the lottery. And so I think that part of it is that, is that idea of just knowing where I came from and that I'm lucky to be where I'm.
And your birth mother, it was the ultimate philanthropist, the ultimate charity of the ultimate love gift. And
we actually know each other today. My birth mother used some kind of service called Adoption Search Angels or something like that to put some information in a database because she always wanted to find me. I was a closed adoption, but she put down, the hospital I was born in or something like that, and the date I was born in, and she found me, and I got a Facebook message in 2011 from my half sister saying, "Hey, I think that my mom is your birth mom." And I was like, I thought it was a scam at first. I was like, I'm not going to wire any money to a bank account. I didn't know because it was just a random Facebook message from a stranger. Right. But anyway, I was sitting with my adoptive mom, the mom that I call my mom, who is my mom, in our living room in my house in the suburbs, and I showed her the message, and she confirmed that is my birth mother, and so we actually, my girlfriend and I just recently went out maybe a year ago to Waco, Texas, and I was part of my half brother's wedding. I was one of the groomsmen at my half brother's wedding in Waco, and that was a crazy experience being with people in Waco. Anyway,
okay, this is gonna make me cry.
I'm a New York Jew, so my Waco family is very, very different from my New York Jewish liberal family, and it was really an interesting exploration. And my girlfriend and I both loved it. We came away from that experience so with our cups so filled. I met my birth father as well there. He's like a cowboy who lives in Fort Worth. He bought me a cowboy hat. Anyway, it was a crazy journey.
I love this.
Kind of
I have a son in Fort Worth, so you and I have some Texas roots. But
there you go. Yeah,
there you go.
Hang out with my birthday.
So I love the story because if you talk about just your roots and even your grassroots groceries, I mean, I think your roots are all based on love and philanthropy. So that is a really beautiful segue.
But, part of it, I think, is also. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, let's say people don't grow up. At least I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of nonprofit founders in the last decade, and not one of them has ever said, "When I grew up, when I was young, I wanted to be a nonprofit founder." Right. Not one.
True.
Something
I wanted to be a lawyer or something. Yeah.
Right. No one ever has it. Never does he make the top 10 list. So you're growing up, you have this beautiful life, and you have this wonderful family, and something usually happens mid-career or on a path that sets someone completely in a U-turn in a direction they didn't expect. It happens every time, and almost every person can tell me that moment of that story when they knew they had to do something. So why don't you share with us what that was for you?
Yeah, sure. So, well, there's that one kind of white light moment, but then there's also kind of the process of getting there. And so I think I want to talk about both of those things.
Sure.
And so it kind of begins with me having a career like in the startup world, doing sales and business development in New York. And that was after deciding that I didn't want to be a lawyer because I interned in my dad's law firm and realized this is not for my dad loves it, but that's the exception to the rule. This is not for me. And so I set off into the startup world. And I loved the element of that world that involved working with people. I really felt I loved just connecting with people and trying to help solve their problems from a sales, and business development perspective. But I just hated the things that I was selling. And so I kind of, I was in the daily deal industry. Remember, like Groupon and Living Social, I was doing something like that. And for a while I sold office supplies to businesses, and it was just not something that really can light you up, and so I moved out to, I decided that I was going to stop everything and move out to Costa Rica. Just for like a life break, and teach English. I'm sure you've heard of people that kind of just take off and teach English like in another place, not because they want to do that as a career, but just because you're figuring out, you're resetting. And so I did that. And I moved out to Costa Rica, and I taught for a year and a half there in the rainforest at first, and then in a city near San Jose, the capital. And I fell in love with teaching. And so I went back to Columbia University Teachers College to get my master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages. And I started working at a school called the American Dream School, which is a school in the South Bronx that whose real population is the children of mostly undocumented Central American and Mexican immigrants. And so that was the student population I was working with at the American Dream School.
Right.
And it's in that experience with students and families at the American Dream School that I get, because that was already like a mistake, was to be a middle school. Like I never thought. My mom actually was a teacher in the Bronx. Like before, she raised me without working in a career, but other than being a mom, which is a great career. But she had been a teacher in the Bronx herself, and I never thought that I'd follow in my mom's footsteps. And then it just kind of happened that there I was teaching in the Bronx.
So you're teaching these, and you've already had these little twists and turns in your career, which is normal, but you get from teaching to starting a nonprofit. So what? Talk to me about what that moment was.
Yeah. Well, I guess the way that it kind of happened is a story that I tell a lot, and that I feel somewhat conflicted about telling, because, and the reason being is that I think that I just want to set the context around the story that it's not about the individual in the story other than me. It's really about me and my introduction to this work, and not about the other individuals in the story, because I think that we can get, these stories can become sensationalized, and they're great for raising money, and part of that storytelling is what we need to do as a nonprofit in order to rope in our supporters.
It's the fine line. It's a fine line that we walk, because we are here to serve humanity, and yet we have to share, to your point, the stories of humanity to do that. And the line is, how do you share the work you're doing without exploiting someone? And I've been involved with Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and we're telling stories of sick children. I mean, and you're like, how do I share this and
exactly right.
highlight the work? So I completely understand.
Right. And so one thing
but this is your story. This is your story.
So exactly. And that's important because every any story that's founder led.
Right.
I mean, any organization, period, but especially one that's still run by the founder, the founder's story is central to the organization.
100%.
And so
you're teaching in the middle school. You're teaching at the American Dream School.
And I'm walking home to the 6 train, which is just the green line in New York City, in the Bronx. And on my way onto the subway, I see one of my students on the sidewalk, whose name I now keep anonymous. I didn't always, but that's why I'm talking about this conversation. One of the things that I've changed. And next to my student, I see that there's this elderly woman who's digging through a trash can, looking for cans or for, dumpster diving. And so I reach out to my student the next day. I take my student aside from the cafeteria, and I ask them, to share about it. And they tell me that the woman was their grandmother, and that this was something that was a normal activity for this woman, and so that was kind of the moment. You realize how many children are going hungry in the United States every day, and that their only meal is often at school. Right, and just because it was a child that I knew, that I taught. So this is before the pandemic too, by the way, right. And so that, when things were, quote, better. Or before people focused on hunger, I mean, it was always a thing, but hunger really got a lot of support during the pandemic. Correct. So here's the thing. There's millions of people that walk by people dumpster diving every day and see people hungry every day, or see people that they think might need something, and they don't do anything about it. They don't do anything. And that's the difference here. And so what I find, and I've never had one nonprofit founder say, oh yeah, I did this, because it's, to our earlier conversation, it's about a community and it's about coming together. But you see a really clear problem. And then what do you do? I mean, you just say, I'm going to start a nonprofit? No. So it started out as just, I wanted to, well, so then COVID happens, right? And school shuts down. And I had always done like donors choose things for my classroom, like, oh, help us get these books or whatever. But there were no books to be bought because there was no classroom to, well, it just wasn't the same. And so I thought, how can I rally my family and friends around something that would be helpful to my student community during the pandemic? And so I decide that we should just raise a bunch of money, because I had heard about, it wasn't just this one student. There were other families that I was learning about during the pandemic who had dealt with food insecurity, or had been dealing with like a lack of internet access in the house, making the classroom really hard, or just other kinds of, day-to-day realities. Right. There were so many needs that and so you're trying to care for your students. Right. So I just said, okay, let's just start a GoFundMe and raise money for the school. And that's the way that I kind of got started with this kind of direct action work, advocating for families, was just raising money on GoFundMe. And so we did that. We raised, And most, I would say 99.9, I would say 100% of the people I've talked to, actually, no one knows what they're getting into when they start this. God, there's no playbook. There's no, I believe there is now a Nonprofits for Dummies, but no one buys it. No one's ever read it that I know of. Who knew? I didn't know when I started mine. Someone needs to write a good version of that. Right. But we all get into this blind, and we all kind of get into this usually because of one person. There's one person we initially want to help, and something, all of a sudden we want to help more and more and more. So you're raising all this money. And at what point do you decide this needs to be a nonprofit? Yeah. So Well, so first part of it was just we're finding out, learning more and more about the situation. So like I did because I wanted to be able to share data with the people that I was raising money from.
Right, with the donors.
And so I just did a little text message survey to 88 families in the 6th grade class. All the families, there were 88 families, and I sent a text message in English and Spanish. And I asked them, have you ever had to cut down on a meal or skip a meal during the pandemic ever since the school buildings have closed?
Right.
45% said yes.
Wow.
This is of the ones, then they knew that who it was, like that it was me sending this message. So that was the ones that were honest enough to admit it to the student's teacher, and then asked another question, which was like about frequency for those that answered yes. And I found out that one out of every 4 of the 88 families were cutting down on meals or skipping meals a few times every week. Wow. And so that data that was specific to my school community, I guess it got me thinking about, well, first of all, the money that we had raised ran out pretty quickly, so that was,
it happens that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's something
especially these days at the grocery store, but yeah, exactly. Well, that's the other thing with rising food prices and everything, but the money ran out quickly, but there were still people that were hungry. Or dealing with food insecurity, and so it actually started out as me thinking, what can we do to make this more sustainable to help feed students and their families? That's not only purchasing food at the consumer price level on Amazon, because we were buying rice and beans and granola bars and stuff and shipping them to families, like, with the money. That's what we did. It was just an emergency response thing. I would, text families and be like, oh, what do you need? It's
some
a Band-Aid,
said,
but
laundry
now,
detergent. Some of them said, like rice and beans, whatever.
But it's a Band-Aid. At the end of the day, it's a Band-Aid, and you're looking for a long-term healing solution for these families.
Didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that the money was running out. And so I knew that there were still people that were hungry. Whether the next solution would be a Band-Aid or not was kind of beyond. At this point, it was just boots on the ground.
Right.
And I hear about this. I'm on a date in the park on the Upper East Side, and the woman on the date tells me about that she's involved or thinking about getting involved with a community refrigerator, and I didn't know what this was. And so that was the only date that this woman and I ever had. We didn't. And
when you're on the right path, people along the way point you in the right direction, and that was one of the people that was supposed to be doing that.
Yes, exactly. And so I looked up community refrigerators, and the idea is just literally a fridge on the sidewalk put down by an organizer, a group of organizers, and that you get plugged into a local store, and you have you get people to donate food that have extra food, and then to put inside the fridge,
right,
and then you have. And then anybody in need can go. It's like a little library concept, where anybody who needs
the little books,
can take
and it's an honor. It's an honor system.
It's an honor system. Yeah. And so I thought, okay, let's do this for my own local school community, because it was already being done, with some level of success. Already gotten media attention, And so I spoke to some people that had done it, and so I said, let's do this. And so I rallied together students and families, not students and families. I mean, they came along too to help to benefit from it. But I rallied together like staff, fellow staff, and my own family and friends, and said, all right, let's start a community fridge in Mott Haven. And so that's the way that this started, was as a teacher's passion project that I called at the time Mott Haven Fridge, because it was a fridge in Mott Haven. And that was still not like, let's turn this into a nonprofit. That was just like, let's make this feeding thing more sustainable.
And this is in 2000. Is this in 2000?
No,
2020. I mean 2020. So 2020, right?
It's September 2020. So it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the next school year.
Right.
COVID had already ravaged our world,
Right.
In March.
Right.
And then we had the summer, and the summer was when I did all of the fundraising, like to get kids all the food and other things and hotspots. And we actually did get some books that we shipped direct that they could pick up and bring home, and because all the camps were closed and and everything. And then September 2020 rolls around, and that's when I work with the school community to launch this community fridge in Mott Haven called Mott Haven Fridge.
So what point did you decide it needed to be a nonprofit?
Well, so this fridge was getting basically I just started thinking about it just basically became a full-time job, this one fridge. Because it's one thing to have a fridge on the street, but then it's on a street corner, but then it's another thing to make sure that it's filled up with food. And at the time there were these grassroots organizers that were working on underground networks to identify extra food and help bring it to these community fridges that were around the city. And so I tapped into that. I got connected, but then suddenly it was about facilitating the
distribution. You're a distributor. You're all of a sudden a food distributor. Right. You're running a distribution business. Right.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, at first it was only for this one community fridge.
Right.
But that's exactly right. And so, yeah, like I would teach Zoom, from just like I am right now, I would teach Zoom, but then in the background, I was, using my iMessage and stuff to text people. You go there, you can pick up this and drop it off there, and it was just becoming. It was like a mission control center outside in my virtual classroom, doing it at the same time as teaching, and it just became unsustainable. It was just, I can't do this well and also be the teacher that my students deserve.
Right.
And so I had to decide: do I either want to scale back the community fridge efforts and stay as a teacher, or do I want to? So I guess that was basically it. Was just that I just knew that there needed to be a more sustainable apparatus.
So what were some of those early challenges?
Well, it's still early. We're still early.
You are in your infancy. You're only 3 years old. You're a toddler. You're a toddler of a nonprofit. You're still a baby.
Exactly.
So what are some of the challenges?
So many challenges. Funding was a huge challenge.
Always. There's no startup, by the way, nonprofit or otherwise, it doesn't have that same challenge.
Yeah, although it's even harder in a nonprofit, because at least with startups you can get angel investors or venture capital money eventually, but with nonprofit there's no real equivalent to an angel investor.
Not really.
Venture capital, and so it's really
foundations. Yeah,
but that's most foundations. We have a little bit of foundation support, but most big deal foundations, they want you to have been around for a certain number of years. They want you to have an audited financial statement, all these things that you don't necessarily have as an early stage nonprofit.
Right.
And so funding and grow and volunteers. And I mean, I don't know, every challenge that you can think of is a challenge that we have.
By the way, welcome to the nonprofit space, because every nonprofit foundation has the identical challenges. So speaking of challenges, I like to say, and you were talking a little bit about, you're juggling, teaching, you're running a nonprofit on the side, you're multitasking, you're torn in all these things. I mean, we have real lives. We still have laundry to do. We still have to get our own groceries. We still have to, go to the dry cleaners. And yet we're serving people. And in your case, if you don't work, they don't eat. And there's a moment where I always say the bucket is heavy, that you just think, how am I going to do this today? And so what fuels you? What fuels you in those moments?
I mean, a couple things. One is my amazing girlfriend and mom and family and dad, just like having great people support in my personal life.
Right.
Is one thing. Another is the amazing community of volunteers. I've recruited over almost 3,000 volunteers to help out with this work, and they light me up.
That's awesome.
And whether it's little kids or high schoolers engaging in some kind of direct action to support their neighbors with food justice, or just every Saturday we have what I call a produce party, where we come together with dozens, if not over 100 volunteers in a parking lot in the South Bronx.
Wow.
And we unload a truck filled with excess surplus produce that we've picked up from the Hunts Point Produce Market, which is the biggest produce market in the country. And then every Saturday, we work together as volunteers to unload that truck, to sort through all the food, and then to load it up into the vehicles of our volunteer drivers who come and bring it to our network of community liaisons, leaders, and so this past Saturday we had, I don't even remember how many vehicles. I think we had 36 volunteer drivers.
Wow.
Over 100 people, I want to say.
Wow.
And we delivered to, I think it was 32 or 34 communities. And we're still waiting on recipient counts from all of our community liaisons. But so far, with not everybody reporting their numbers, we reached over 1,000 families in that one Saturday.
So impact, let's talk about impact. You're talking about all these incredible people that you fed and served and distributed. And impact is a word that I have a serious love-hate relationship with, because how do you measure impact when you're feeding someone who can now pay attention in your class and function as a human being? How do you measure? You can say I served this many meals or I did this, but our impact is often so much more. And when we are asked to give kind of our ROI or return on investment to our donors of our impact, I don't think it often equates to what we're really doing. So if you had to define what your impact is, whether it's stats or story, what would that be?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I first of all, I totally agree with you about the kind of necessary evil of statistics in this work, because I'll actually just share a random story about another nonprofit that I heard. This is just about the dangers of foundations and funders asking for specific metrics. And it was a story that I heard about somebody who was working with rape victims in Africa. And the criteria for the grant were the number of victims that you were able to treat, like with services, right?
Right.
But then this organization realized, as I'm sure that, I mean, if you've ever been in therapy, I've been in so much. There was a New York Jew. I've been in way more therapy than I can even count. But I know that therapy is not just a one-off engagement with somebody, right?
Right.
And so, but this foundation, this grantor, wanted to know the number of people that had been treated, that had received a therapy session, as opposed to people getting ongoing treatment, but which would obviously be a smaller group of people, but they would actually get the treatment that they needed. And so I thought that you really have to make sure that you're measuring things that matter.
Right. And how you measure that.
Who are sitting in some, place somewhere that's outside of the work that we do, it's very difficult. So I love this new movement that I think is really taking root in trust-based philanthropy, which is all about empowering nonprofit leaders and saying, hey, here's money for your general operating. We know that you, as somebody with boots on the ground, knows where to allocate these dollars to make the most impact. So we're not going to ask you for impact metrics that we don't really understand.
And the frustrating thing is that we spend so much time trying to measure our worth that we're not doing the work, and we're using our resources to hire someone to help us measure.
That's exactly right.
And it ends up creating a crazy situation.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
And so when I have funders that tell me, like, oh, we only fund program, like, so, I mean, you have to work with them. Unfortunately, I have to do that sometimes. But it's a frustrating thing because all the money goes to good, is the point.
Right.
Is it none of it's being siphoned off into some kind of, vacation fund or something.
Right. So do you like to tell people?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, just in terms of impact. Yes, for me, I do both. And so, for example, all of our volunteers that came out this past Saturday, they got an email, saying that you this past Saturday, you moved about 10,000 pounds of excess produce to 34 different communities throughout Harlem and the Bronx, and you reached over 1,000 families through community leader liaisons who gave out that food to their neighbors in need in the way that they saw best. So that's something that every volunteer received.
And that's just one weekend. That's just one.
That was just one weekend. Yeah. That happens every weekend, but a different version of that.
Right.
But so that's one thing. But then, I mean, so much of it, because the other thing that we do is we help set up these community refrigerators like the one I started in Monhaven, like you said, is based on the honor system, in different housing projects throughout the city. And the impact metrics there are you don't really, I mean, eventually once we get to be really big and fancy, you can do some things with technology. Like if you have the fridge connected to Wi-Fi, you have weight sensors that can detect, how full or empty a fridge is. And you can use kind of motion sensors to figure out how many times the doors are big, but we don't have any technology like that yet.
Like the hotel, when you take the M&Ms and they're like, we need to take the M&Ms out of the refrigerator.
Exactly. Right. So you
can charge $7 for your bag of M&Ms.
Right. So that could happen eventually. Right. But we are nowhere near there right now. And so that's based totally on people believing in the idea of dignified and anonymous access to food for people that are not getting it from the food pantry or other more institutional research. So they just have to buy into that idea and that belief that these community fridges are serving a need and filling a gap that are not being filled by some of the other services that might have more direct, concrete impact statistics, So there's that. And I also think that all of the stories are so important to highlight. And like every Saturday, our volunteers are bringing food to community leaders. And then our community leaders are the ones who are then giving out the food to their people in need. And so we have this crew of community leaders. I call them grassroots grocers of the grassroots grocers family.
Love that.
And they all have stories of their own.
Right.
They're all doing this work, mostly for almost all of them are doing it for free, just because they're leaders in their community and they want to give food to their people in need. And so they're also volunteers. They're not the volunteer drivers, although some pick up for their own communities, but they're volunteers giving out. And so one of my real aspirations for this year, and I've been working with this a graduate student at NYU to do a little bit of this, and we have some paid interns from Fordham who I think will hop in and help out with this, is we want to be able to spotlight all of those community leaders and share their stories.
Nice.
Whether it's through video or a blog post or whatever, to really put some shine on all of these boots on the ground grassroots leaders that are giving it. So really just centering that story of all, and the concepts and the ideas and the beliefs that were perpetuated, that we're helping to build,
So Dan, if you had any dream, because you can't be a founder, you can't be an entrepreneur without a dream. You obviously had a dream when you started this to take care of the families in your class, and the dream always expands and the dream always gets bigger. But if you had any dream for Grassroots Groceries, what does that look like? What's the big dream?
Well, I guess every nonprofit food access founder, the real dream is to end food insecurity. But that's not going to be in my lifetime, probably, although it would be amazing if it would be. But my dream is just for this mentality this mindset of neighbors helping neighbors to promote food justice kind of just takes root across more communities and becomes ingrained into the habit of people's lives. And it's already happening. We have families that are making sandwiches or that are taking leftover meals and putting them into Tupperware containers and filling the community fridges with them, or taking time out of their Saturday once a month to join us in a produce party. But if it really just became commonplace,
right?
This idea that we all need to come together. It can't just be these big food rescue trucks or these big nonprofits or the policymakers. It's up to all of us, even if it's just a couple hours a month. That's really my dream, is for that mentality, that worldview to just wash over the world. Yeah.
Amen. I love that. So you've been on this wild 3-year journey. I have to take a gander. There's been some life lessons you've learned in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you care to share any life lessons that you've learned since you started the Grassroots Grocery? You alluded to a couple of them at the beginning of our conversation about people being good. I would say that would probably be one of them, but I'm not trying to do a spoiler alert.
No, people are amazing, and that's something that I think I always knew, though. But what's a life lesson that I learned is just how, one, I think that it's just so important to have meaning in the work that I do. It's really important for me to do something that feels meaningful, and it's starting a nonprofit is by far. I actually, another part of my story that I never even shared. I've been sober for 12 years or something like that.
Congratulations!
Thank
Congratulations.
you. So
that's
too.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that's and starting a nonprofit is even harder than getting sober. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Now that's a new one for me, because I would say getting sober is probably one of the hardest things you could ever do. Having walked the journey with a number of people that I know, but that I do. I mean, think
not for everybody. I got sober young, but for me, it's just by far the most difficult thing that I've ever had to do, and it's so important to have. I'm just so lucky that I created that this amazing community of neighbors helping neighbors has sprung up about me, because it's those people. I mean, even Natalie, who introduced me to you, is a volunteer, is one of our community of neighbors helping neighbors, and the fact that I can do this work and light people up and get people's kids involved and spread this message. It just, that's what fills my cup. So I guess just centering meaning and finding a way to remember all of the blessings of the work that you're doing. It's so easy to get mired down in the things you haven't done yet, and the money you still have to raise, and the impact you still have to do, and the people that are not happy with you or whatever. There's
but at the end of the day, we get paid in different ways. We don't get into this for the money. This isn't the work that you don't do. Yeah. You don't do this to get rich. But we get paid, to your point, in having a purpose-driven life, and we get paid in seeing kindness and compassion and generosity move forward, and we get to witness that and be a part of that journey and that community and that connection.
Right.
And there's no amount of money that can replace that for any human being. And I think one of the reasons I love having conversations with people like you is to let everyone know who's listening, who hasn't found that purpose yet, to keep looking and to keep serving and keep trying on different things, because it is the greatest gift you will ever give yourself.
Yeah. And I think so many people that's what I love about Grassroots Grocery also, is that it doesn't only give me meaning, but it gives our community leaders meaning, who give out food every week, we are able to be a catalyst for that. and it also gives our community of volunteers meaning, and
Absolutely.
and allows them to, and that's what amazes me is like people who, advocate for us with their kids' schools or their workplaces or, all of the relationships that I have today are through a volunteer reaching out to their own community and saying, "Hey, check out Grassroots Grocery. How can we help?" And that's a blessing too, to be able to be that for other people and for them to reciprocate and help us grow. And, so yeah.
That's how you change the world, Dan. That's how it happens.
That's
just
right.
Like that.
Yeah.
That's how we change the world. One person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one neighbor at a time. That's how it's done. So tell us how we can support you, how we can donate, how we can volunteer, where we can find you on social media.
For sure.
All of those good things.
For sure. So first of all, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm just Daniel Zauderer, Zauderer, on LinkedIn. I would love for you to become a part. I post a lot there with just different things that we're doing with corporations and communities. On Instagram, and on Instagram we are Grassroots Grocery NY. Remember the NY, and my personal Instagram is Daniel Zauderer. And your website is your website.
Yeah,
is Grassroots GRASS Roots ROOTS Grocery .org is our website. And if you're in the New York area, go online and sign up to volunteer. And I'll see you at a produce party or at filling a fridge near you. And if you're not in the New York area, consider your financial support, because we would love, it's a really long road as a young nonprofit becoming sustainable. And it's thanks to all the people who support us financially that we can make this work happen. So, click the donate button on grassrootsgrocery.org or facilitate a gift through your donor advised fund. And let's make this thing happen.
Or if you're a food manufacturer and you're listening and you have extra
that is true too.
product, please think about sending some distribution Dan's way to Grassroots Groceries.
Absolutely. Dan, and you can reach me, by the way. Anybody can email me at Dan at grassrootsgrocery.org. Would be happy to be in conversation with any of your listeners. It's just an awesome work that you're doing, spotlighting nonprofits that are working on big problems in the world. So,
well, we're so grateful for you, Dan. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you're doing to feed and inspire this community of future givers and servant leaders and filling their tummies and their brains and doing all this incredible good work. We're so grateful for you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Charity Matters podcast. I really enjoyed talking to our guest, Dan Zauderer, about what it takes to start a business that truly changes people's lives. I think his comment about having a life full of meaning was so inspiring and true. To learn more about modern day heroes like Dan, or if you'd like to reach out to us, visit us at charity-matters.com or connect with us on Instagram at Charity Matters. If you enjoyed our conversation, we would love it if you shared it with your family and friends. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. But more importantly, thank you for caring, for believing in goodness, and being a part of our movement. You are exactly what the world needs more of. Remember that together, we can make a difference, one small act of kindness at a time. Charity matters. See you next time.